my God, here we go. Sensei Annie Pirruccello back on the podcast once again here, early morning. Maybe not early for you, a little early for me. I just woke up. I haven't had anything to eat. I'm stretched a little bit, meditated a little bit. But it's hard for me to meditate like on the road like this because I'm staying at my buddy's house. He wakes up earlier than me. He puts on football games first thing in the morning.
Oh,
it's a hard environment for me to meditate in. But as you've told me several times throughout my life, it's important to be meditating every day. It's a good habit to be in. Something that I've tried to follow through with, but it's hard.
It is hard. It is hard.
How long have you been meditating for?
Gosh, now I'm really going to show my age, probably about 37, 38 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I started actually before college, and I had just been reading about meditation and meditative traditions, and it just caught my imagination. So I started from a book, and then when I was in college, I took a philosophy class that was taught by a man who used to be used to belong to some contemplative order. But he taught us Asian methods of meditation. And by that time I was totally hooked. And it kind of became a part of my everyday sort of mental hygiene, you could say. And I've been meditating ever since.
Yeah.
Long time.
Mental hygiene is a good way to put it. I like that. Mental hygiene.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what it is. Like, I tell people that I go on these meditation retreats. I went with you, when was it, last week? I lost all track of time. Mm-hmm. We spent 8 hours a day meditating. And when I tell people this, they kind of have an impression of like, oh, okay, so now you're done. Right?
You're done.
Yeah, it's okay. So you realized everything you need to realize, and then what do you do now? You just go to the mountain and you float? And no, not at all. The biggest analogy I've come to is like if you went to like a weightlifting camp or something, like you go there and you learn all these like weightlifting techniques from these really good big guys. You're not gonna be that big after 1 week. You'll be a little bigger, you'll be a little stronger, you'll know some good stuff, but then the practice comes afterwards.
Yeah, the practice is your life, really. So it never, ever ends. But the retreats are great because it's kind of like turning up the flame a little bit of the intensity of the meditation. We've talked about how, when you do a retreat, you build up this concentrative power. The Japanese term is joriki. And it's really amazing how when you build up that power, you really can see more deeply into your life. And of course, in Zen practice, we're hoping to get a deeper understanding or a deeper realization of the emptiness of things, the sort of the lack of substantiality, the impermanence, the fluidity of our lives. And then when we see that more clearly, we see there's nothing to hang on to. And sometimes we get an insight into the interconnectedness of things, and we realize that we are much vaster than we ever thought we were. Okay, and so again, the retreats are the retreats can help sort of increase that concentrative power or joriki.
Okay, so you just claimed that we're empty and interconnected. But I once saw a guy with darker skin than me. I'm like a really smart guy, Sensei. So when I'm in a situation, I need to prove my smartness. What are you talking about with emptiness? What are you saying? What do you mean? Are you saying that someone who looks different than me could be smarter than me when I'm like a really smart guy?
It's actually more radical than that. I'm saying that you guys are ultimately not two. Ultimately not two.
Asian philosophy is all into this non-duality. That's a big part of it. Would you say that's like the heart of most Asian philosophy, just non-duality?
I hate to make big, giant generalizations of a family of traditions that is just beyond rich. It's diverse, it's rich. There are many, many, many different views, philosophers, themes, and so forth. But non-duality does come up a lot in various Asian traditions. So let's just say it's an important theme.
It's an important theme.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a great time at this retreat. Building up that Jiriki is such like a pleasure. Before the retreat, I started writing again, which is something I hadn't done in like several months. Mm-hmm. I started writing, and I was thinking about this story. I was thinking about this time that I spent in Taiwan. I don't know if I ever told you about the tea cult I hung out with, the Tea Sage Hut.
I think you told me a little bit about it, but refresh my memory.
So it's just like, to me, in my mind, it's just a guy has the coolest life. He set up a house where travelers can come by, drink tea, and meditate, and he sends out tea knowledge to the world. He has a monthly magazine that comes with a tea and like a gift, and then as soon as it's sent out, it goes online for free for everyone. He's pushing out just so much tea knowledge.
Wow.
But the reason that I thought of it is that they've kind of designed a life to retain all this Jiriki. Mm-hmm. Because you've told me on retreats, like an easy way to get rid of Jiriki is alcohol is a big one. Like people meditate for a week and they have all this energy, all this creativity. That's a big part of it. Mm-hmm. All these things to do. Like I always say when I come out of a retreat, I'm sprinting and doing cartwheels. Like just I have places to go, I have things to do. And then if you drink a lot, supposedly, I put this to the test and it didn't really happen for me, but I believe you that's happened for others. All the drinking can go away from drinking. So it's a completely sober environment. Another way is mindless talking, like small talk or, I don't know, other ways of talk that's not so important. You know, I mean, if you're on fire, say something. But like,
exactly.
If you have a problem, say something. If you're lonely, talk to somebody. Yeah, there are times to talk, but like mindless chatter, talking about sports that you're not interested in, that's one for me. Yeah,
and we're talking about at retreat. I mean, our retreats are silent, or mostly silent. There's always some amount of talking that goes on when you're trying to maintain, food and trying to operate a retreat for whatever 10 to 15 people during a week. There's bound to be some talking, but it's mostly silent, and the silence really helps us develop that Jiriki. Mm-hmm. So during the retreat, we try not to, we really try as hard as we can not to talk, and as you said, because that's what we call a leak. That's because your Jiriki really does want to express itself, it moves you to talk and joke around and stuff. But if you can refrain from doing that, then it's available to you for examining your life. And we were saying that after retreat, you can actually keep that Jiriki at a very high level for maybe a week to 10 days. But you can also, as you're mentioning, blow it all very easily by, drinking and,
having a really good time.
But we're not against good times, believe me.
Not anti-good time.
Not at all. We're not about asceticism. We want people to lead happy lives.
Mm-hmm. And so the Tea Sage Hut, one of the things that they do to keep in Jiriki and all that is when they drink tea, they have this big epic tea table. If I knew more about wood, I could say a certain type of wood, and someone would go, "Oh, that's a nice table." It's a good table. Mm-hmm. It's huge. It can fit maybe 7 people comfortably, and they just make tea for as many people who are there. They have teapots of every size. The room is filled with tea. It's a room about this size, but imagine if the walls are just stacked with tea. Like you've seen tea that comes in cakes. Mm-hmm. It comes in a traditional thing, I believe, is 8 cakes. And so there's several of these boxes stacked up each on top of each other, next to each other. It's an amazing amount of amazing quality tea. But when they drink tea, the first 4 bowls of tea are in silence. And the rule is, after that, if you have something to say, if you have, a question, then it's an appropriate time. And something really interesting happens to where once we start talking, it's a really good conversation. There's none of this like, oh, where's the tea from? Oh, it's from this mountain. Okay, where's that? It's like, do you really care that much? Like, is it that important? How's the tea processed? How's any tea? I don't know. Like, what's the effects? Is caffeine in this tea? Drink it. See how you feel. I don't know. And all these things. So as soon as it's done, like if someone has something to say, like, "Oh, this song we listened to sucks." I don't know. That's kind of no one talks like that. But my point is that it's such a great place that they've done all these things. Another thing I think is, have you heard of this? Like, I think diet has a lot to do with Reiki. That's something I noticed this weekend because I went from the retreat to Las Vegas, and on the retreat, it's all essentially vegan food. It's a lot of vegetables, a lot of rice, really good stuff, really light, and really good for sitting. Because if you eat like a big meal and then try to meditate, it's pretty hard. For reasons I don't quite understand. Something about blood flow, perhaps. But then when I got to Vegas, my diet went terribly. Because I was working, and they were very kind. They gave us breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But it's all like, when you're appealing to the masses, you have to, it's a lot of bagels, a lot of, it's mostly bread. It's all just bread, which isn't something that I tend to eat much. And so I think that had a big part. Is this something you've heard about before? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a lot about the sort of the physiology of it, but it's true. It's traditional in Zen retreats to eat vegetarian. We happen to eat mostly vegan because our Tenzo, our chef, is vegan, and so he he's really good at cooking delicious and nutritious vegan meals, and the food makes a huge difference. You can sit all those days and get really constipated if the food is not right, and then that's not comfortable, and that's not great for your meditation practice or experience. And also, I think that the digestibility of the food plays a role. But again, I don't have a lot of precise knowledge about, why this kind of food is important or these meals are important, over other kinds of foods.
Yeah.
Traditionally, many, many Buddhists, of course, are vegetarians. And so that's part of, we're trying to engage in non-harming. And so there are sort of, kind of moral reasons for eating the way we do.
Yeah, and I think, because I don't know too much about diet either, but I did read a good book called The Yoga of Eating, which was like very, he doesn't say anything about like this food's good, this food's bad. It's just eat food and see how you feel. That's what it boils down to. And a big part of it is if you want to change your diet, you got to change your life. And his example is a power lifter who's lifting weights all day needs a vastly different diet than someone in an office who has to like sit there and have concentration of mind, but is not moving around that much. Maybe they don't get that so much dopamine. So that's why offices tend to have a lot of comfort food. That's like mostly what it, in my experience, boils down to, which is different than a monastery where it's like you just need to kind of stay alive and not much more. Constipation's an issue. But you need some energy. You're doing a little bit of work outside, but not so much as the power lifter.
Not so much as the power lifter. But I do want to add, though, that the aesthetics of food are really important in our tradition and in our lineage. We do try to make our food really appealing and delicious. And when we eat oryoki style, and oryoki is kind of the ritual form of having a meal during a Zen retreat, we can make our food so that it's absolutely beautiful. And, we have to cut it up so that it fits into the, pretty small oryoki bowls. And so we're not just eating to survive, we're eating to appreciate our lives, and we want to really appreciate the food. And when we're meditating and our senses are all opened up, we can really taste that food, we're not just shoveling it in, as often happens to us in our super busy lives, but with our jiriki, with the dilation of our senses, we're really enjoying that food too.
Yeah, that's something it's always surprising to me. It's around like day 3 or 4 is when I notice that. It's like, Jesus Christ, this is the best rice I've ever had.
Exactly.
It's usually I've had many times, and that's another part that when you talk about retreat to people who haven't been, like vegan, I could never do vegan, not knowing that there's a lot of like spices and a lot of good stuff going on with it that I don't quite understand. I don't know what's going on. I couldn't quite reproduce it at this moment, but it's great. It's tremendous. It's good stuff. Good food.
Oh yeah.
So earlier you were talking about emptiness. Emptiness is like one of the concepts that I always try to think about in terms of Zen. Just and I never quite got a good way of explaining it, but everything is empty. We are all empty. There's nothing fixed in this world. There's nothing. So am I wrong to say that means that there's nothing that has to go a certain way outside of the laws of nature? Gravity has to go a certain way, but your eyebrows make it sound like it doesn't.
Well, because it's a little more complicated than that. Because we, in Zen we talk about these we could call them 2 modes of realization. On the one hand, we can realize our life from what we sometimes call the side of emptiness, where we're realizing, again, the empty and fluid nature of everything. There's no fixed essence. There's nothing that's solid and permanent. There's nothing that is sort of discrete or separate. Everything is connected. Everything is sort of interpenetrating, you could say. But on the other hand, we also talk about realizing life from the relative side. And from the relative side, we perceive the world as having differences, as made up of or including all kinds of separate individual objects or separate individuals, you could say. From the relative side, we may not see things as having an essential connection to one another. We may see things as sort of, again, solid and permanent looking and so forth. But ultimately, the two are one. Even when we see the differences and the so-called objects from the relative side, we can also realize that they are ultimately empty. But again, you talked about this as a notion, and it does function as like a concept or a notion in Buddhist philosophy. But in Zen practice, what we're really trying to encourage is a much more experiential realization of that, because that's what's liberating, that's what's transformative. Not getting an intellectual idea of how the world may be empty, but really realizing that you and I are not two. Or we had someone on the retreat who was going very, very deep. And, he had an experience of the dog barking as not separate from him. Their being was completely interpenetrating. And that's the kind of experience that can be very liberating. It can sort of unhook you or unlatch you from many of your self-concepts, your ideas of being a separate individual that you have to defend and you have to make successful, and you have to orient all of your life around this self that you think you are. And with Zen practice, you can again realize a much vaster, a much more expanded sense of who you are.
I remember when I was taking your class, you introduced a good concept that I think is related to this, is the man of no rank. A guy who can just kind of embody whatever role makes sense in that situation. And so for me, I've been trying to do stand-up comedy for a couple of years now. It's something I think about all the time, and it's almost a trap because they get in these situations where it's like, all right, I just made a good joke. Let's keep it coming. Let's keep it coming. I'll be the funny guy. Okay. Which is like exhausting sometimes. It's terrible. Like not everyone wants to be around that guy because when it goes well, it's great. It's tremendous. But if it's not going so well and you're still trying to make jokes, no one wants to be around that guy.
Yeah.
And so after the retreat, I was pretty good about, noticing that myself. Like, okay, I don't need to say anything more. It's okay. I can just either go in this corner or just ask him questions, be serious. It's fine. But when I arrived in Vegas for my job was very easy. It's filming a Jujutsu tournament. And so we all gathered around. This is the first time all the employees were together. We had a 7-minute unplanned training session. It's the easiest thing in the world. Just type their name here, do this. But the point is that we're all together for the first time. And a guy came up, one of the employees, same job as me. He's like, all right, guys, hope you brought your energy. I'm the funny guy. Get ready. And so just from then on, I was like, all right, this is the guy to watch. Like, what's he going to do? Because he set himself up for failure. Like, he can't be that funny for 3 days in a row, and it's exhausting. It's 12-hour days. And so the next day, I show up, and we were there pretty early. They tell you to get there earlier than you have to be just because they're used to people coming late. And, they set up breakfast and bagels and coffee. And so I'm there, and my neck's kind of sore. I've been sleeping on floors for a week. I'm kind of stretching out. And one way I like to do it is I roll up my neck, touch my toes, and I do a handstand. Something about handstands really aligns the body, or I don't really know. It feels good. And so I do it. I warm up a little bit, and I do a handstand, and I hear from behind me that same guy going, I could do that. Okay. And so he does. He runs over, attempts a handstand without doing all the stuff that I did before. The rolling out the neck, the touching the toes, the rolling out your shoulders, stuff that for me is necessary to do a handstand, and apparently is also for him because he couldn't do it. Handstands aren't easy, but he set himself up as this guy who will not be outdone. He'll be funnier than you. He'll be, and it was just interesting to watch. He couldn't put it down.
And that's what we all do, right? I love your description of this fellow because he's a perfect illustration of what we all do a lot of the time. We have this idea of who we are, and we often have lots of ideas who we should be, and we want that person that we think we are and should be. We want that person to be successful. We're looking for approval all the time. We're looking to be valued. There's nothing wrong with what that guy does, okay? But in living life that way, there's a lot of suffering involved in that kind of life, right?
Get a lot of doubt.
Exactly, because, we can't control everything. We can't control all the causes and conditions that play into our lives. And as you were saying, you can't force yourself to be funny all the time and, force all this creativity and so forth. And so in Zen, like you said, we are, one of the things that our practice helps us do is be the person who can move in the 10 directions. That is to say, that we can do what's needed as the situations that we're in call for it. And so, in other words, we learn how to be spontaneous, sort of in accord with the situation. But that's not something that we can force. It's more of a letting. It's when we've let go of our expectations, of our demands, of our self-notions and so forth. It's when we've let go of a lot of that stuff. When we've let go of the ropes we use to bind ourselves, that we can truly be creative and spontaneous and so forth. We can operate as the true man of no rank. Okay, he's a true man of no rank because he's not forcing himself. He's sort of the, our luminous mind that's always there for us, underneath all those, judgments and demands that we make on ourselves, that luminous mind, that true man of no rank, he's always there. As Rinzai said, or Linji said, he's going in and out of the gates of your face. As you see, as you hear, and as you breathe. But again, we don't. He's always available to us. I say he, but it's obviously not a he and it's not a she. Right. It's this luminous wisdom that we all have. But again, we don't realize that wisdom because, we've got these ingenious minds that are making all kinds of plans for us and generating all kinds of expectations and so forth. So when we practice Zen, we kind of quiet down all those expectations, and then, our practice allows us to kind of open moment by moment to our life as it's actually unfolding. Instead of only being open to life as we want it, as we demand it, as we prefer it. And so we learn to hold these things with a much more open hand.
Yeah, for me, the the biggest example of this is Jujitsu. So many times in Jujitsu, especially for me because I've been moving around the past couple of years, I've studied with different teachers who all have different styles. And I don't know if you're aware, but there's a big division in Jiu-Jitsu these days. There's traditional Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where you wear a gi, which is the kimono, the outfit. You have a belt on, but there's also no gi. So for 3.5 years, I only trained in the gi, just because that's the instructors I chose. That's what they prefer, so I'm not going to be rude. I do exactly whatever they want to teach me, I'll do it. But then the past 6 months, I've been training at a school called 10th Planet, which is very famous, almost like punk rock jiu-jitsu. Like, it's just like, they've made it their mission to not do anything Brazilian jiu-jitsu. The rules are different, the outfits are different, there's certain moves you do here, and you can't, it is almost like a dichotomy's been, I don't know what the next word is. Anyway, but I go back and forth now. So I was in Vegas. I saw my teacher from San Diego, Rodrigo Medeiros. Very traditional guy. He's trained under Carlson Gracie, the Grandmaster. Always trains in the gi. Does no gi sometimes, but doesn't really prefer it. But he invited me to come train here, and I'm very lucky that I got in with him, and he's a good friend. And so he comes down here, and I want to prove to him that my no gi stuff applies in the gi. Silly, right? Especially in the context that the only way to show him is while I'm fighting a grown man who almost is always bigger than me. Yesterday, he was 2 belt ranks above me. Speaking of a man of no rank, Jiu-Jitsu's all ranked.
It's all about right.
I have a blue belt. He had a brown belt. Brown is higher. I'm not supposed to beat this guy. But in my head, I was like, I need to prove to Rodrigo that, I don't know, like what 10th Planet works. Like, it's stuff that he already knows. Like, he's already thought about this. He's come to his own conclusions. He knows infinitely more than I do. It's like if I came to you with a different meditation practice, you've probably seen it. You've probably heard about it. There's not much that I could find out that you haven't come across in your, 38 years? some new philosopher you don't know about. I'm like, oh, do you know about Alan Watts? Yeah. Have you heard of Ram Dass? Yeah. And so I'm in there, and it's so I went through this yesterday. And I was like, okay, I got to prove to everybody here. Because you say the word 10th Planet, and people go, whoa, they do weird stuff there. They do heel hooks. A heel hook being a move that's illegal in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's essentially if you twist a guy's heel, his knee explodes.
Oh.
The LCL runs down, and so you feel it, you twist it up, and you can kind of feel it coming out. It's been deemed too dangerous in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. 10th Planet says it's not. I agree with 10th Planet. It's one of those moves that if you practice it and you know it's coming, you can either defend or you can tap. Jiu-Jitsu is beautiful in that way, that if any situation is you're in over your head, you just tap. So you feel the heel hook coming, you look, okay, I'm not getting out of this, you tap. It's okay, no problem. But if you have the from the lineage where you never learn it, and then you're in a situation, perhaps in like a world championship situation, where your ego is very invested, you need to be world champion, you've come this far, you've put in these years, you told all your friends, your family's behind you, you're probably not going to tap. That's when knees explode. I don't know what my point was there. But I came in there with lots of ego and lots of things to prove. When I didn't need to do any of that. They don't care. No one cares.
One thing I would say about this, though, is, you might remember me making a few remarks about this at the retreat, and that is, whatever sort of lineage you're working in and whatever set of practices your teacher has given to you, I mean, once you've established a certain trust, a critical trust in your lineage, your teacher, your practice, and so on. Once you've decided that this is okay, this is a good match for you, this is safe for you, people are looking out for you and they're supporting your best interests, then it's really helpful to just let go, just to surrender to that practice and to that teacher and to that, that place or that situation. I stress that you don't want to surrender until you feel like you are in a safe place and you do trust the people, because as we know, there are all kinds of bad things that can happen to people when they misplace their trust, right? And we certainly don't want to overlook that, or encourage people to just go and sort of submit themselves, to teachers that they don't know well. But there does come a point, and I'm sure you experienced this with your work with Rodrigo, that when you have developed that trust and you do feel like you are in good hands, then if you really want to do the practice to the utmost, you have to surrender. And, trust that practice, trust that teacher, and so forth. And so I imagine when you're working in these two very different lineages, it's hard to cross from one to the other, because what you've surrendered to in one is not what you've surrendered to in the other.
Right. And I got stuck in between yesterday. Because in Jujitsu, it's kind of like music, where there's only a couple situations. You know what I mean? The same way in music, there's only a couple notes you can play. It's limited. Yeah. But in these situations, you can take them many different directions. And so, I did kind of get stuck in one foot in two boats.
Because it's the limit. It's the limits. It's sort of the protocols and the rules, the practices of any one of these that makes the game, right? And that makes makes it possible to have some kind of a practice that you can work within. And so if you've got a kind of a clash, clash of practices, that's a tricky one.
Yeah, but it's fun.
Yeah.
I do enjoy it though. I do like going back and forth. I like telling them that I train at the other one. I like that look in their eye. They go, whoa. I do enjoy that, and it's just cool. Like, because in my mind, I don't see much of a difference in terms of the two types of jujitsu. People, especially on the internet, maybe they don't actually believe this. Maybe they're just trying to gain some sort of entrance into the groups. Sometimes like if you're gonna join a gang, you kind of have to go up and go, fuck those other gangs, even if you don't really know why. It's just something you kind of have to go through. And so I do, because in my mind, it's the same exact thing. It's a group of guys getting together, making friends, and going to war in a ritualistic fashion that's safer than it looks, but it sets off all the hormonal responses of battle. That's what it is. It's adrenaline, it's fear, it's anxiety. You see yourself, you see them, and there's nowhere to hide. You can't walk into a gym and be like, I could kill anyone here. All right, we'll do that at the end of practice. We have a time to prove that. It's fine. You don't have to say anything. There's no place to hide in it. And so in my mind, that's why it's the exact same thing. Like, I don't see all these divisions. You know, people say like, oh, I train no gi only. Fuck the gi. If I trained the gi, it'd be boring. My life would be terrible. Like, no, your life would be the exact same. It would be nice. You would like it. You might say the same thing about no gi. It's the same mentality. It's the same stuff. It's just love. It's just you show up there and you want to love this person and you want to improve yourself because you love yourself. And so this is a good way to do it. Which is so that's why I don't see all the distinctions. I don't get caught up in the beef. I was at the tournament this weekend. It was very traditional. I loved it. It was amazing. It looks a little bit differently, but it's the same thing in my mind. Next weekend I'll go to a no-gi tournament. It'll be awesome. I'm very excited. It's cool. I like bouncing back and forth. But I guess that's a bit of a Ronin mentality. Whereas the samurai with his master, maybe he goes further, but maybe the Ronin has more fun. I don't know. I'm not too sure exactly. Because I can't think the way that my life is going where I'm traveling. I'm trying to drive around a lot more. I was in Vegas this past weekend. I'll be back there a lot more because there's a coach out there who's made me a very generous offer. Anytime I'm in town, I have a floor to sleep on. I have food to eat, training to be trained. I don't know the right way to say that.
That's wonderful.
It's incredible. In Costa Mesa, where my parents are, I can sleep on their floor. They'll give me food. There's a good gym nearby. San Diego, my friend lives in Pacific Beach. He has a floor. He has food. Rodrigo's right there. So I kind of think of wherever I am, follow that lineage. That's kind of where I'm at. And maybe at some point I'll make the decision. I'll draw a line in the sand, like 10th planet only. I don't know. Like that doesn't sound like me.
It sounds like you're operating much more sort of on the side of you're picking up what's the same about them rather than focusing on the differences. And you know, in Zen we also talk about having no place to hide. You know, when a Zen student goes in to see the teacher, hiding becomes really obvious. You know, they might start joking, they might start sort of intellectualizing about, you know, their koan or, you know, why they're experiencing suffering in their life or whatever. And it just becomes really, really obvious. And the teacher just kind of has to hold up a little mirror, you know, to show people how they're hiding. And so we have lots of practices that kind of cut at that tendency that we all have to kind of hide and not really be with our lives as our lives are unfolding.
Yeah, that's an interesting part of your job is, what is it, twice a day at Sesshin, you talk to every single student in a small soundproof room. Very interesting. Like, not a lot of people like get to hear. I'm sure you hear lots of intimate details and lots of, you see people transform, I'm sure.
I do.
That's very unique. Yeah, I think that's cool. That's a good segue into, do you feel like a rich person?
I do feel like a rich person. I feel like an amazingly rich person. I feel, you know, I feel super blessed in that I was able to find a Zen lineage and a teacher that was a good match. We were good matches for one another. I'm feeling super rich living in Southern California where the weather is great. I'm from Chicago. I never quite adjusted to the winters back there. I've got incredible friends like you, and amazing. I have an amazing family, amazing students. I am super rich, super rich.
Luckiest woman in the world.
I am.
That's awesome.
Really appreciate my life.
Well, I'll try to destroy that for you. I got a story for you.
All right.
I don't know how many people I've told this story to, but it's a very important thing, and you are a central key in it, even though you didn't know it at the time. This takes place when I was 19. I was a sophomore in college at USD. I was in your intro to philosophy class, kind of enjoying it, but not really getting much out of it, because you start in intro to philosophy, you start with like Plato and Socrates, very smart guys, but kind of hard to take into day-to-day life, you know, what they're talking about. I didn't find it too helpful, but it was interesting. It was very, very interesting. Then my friend came upon a good amount of acid which I had never done at the time, but I was very interested in. I think I had done mushrooms once, which is pretty similar. So we go down to Sunset Cliffs, one of the most beautiful places in the world. We get dropped off, we take the acid. About 3 hours later, I'm looking at the cliffs. And I'm sure you're familiar with the cliffs. They're very eroded in very beautiful ways. You can look up and you can see all these like intricate, like sometimes the lines go squiggly, sometimes they go straight down, sometimes they're jagged. It doesn't always make sense exactly how they arrived. But when I was looking at them, and I was looking at like, okay, so when it rains, the water goes up there, and then it's always going towards the ocean. That's just how it's built. That's how gravity works. And so you can kind of look up and see like a design in the cliff that doesn't make sense. If you walk up closer to it, if you look around it, you can kind of see like, okay, so there's a rock in the way. So that's why the water would go down this way. Okay, and so then you kind of do this. And if you, the big realization was that the perspective that you take can influence the understanding of how this came. And I started relating that to people in the sense that someone's actions are traceable in their own life, just like the erosion of the cliff is traceable in a very logical way. And the extreme example that I've come up with is if you and I are, say, going to Balboa Park, just having a nice day, and then I make a joke. Maybe you could say like, okay, he made a good joke. Maybe he's seen a lot of stand-up. His dad's probably funny. It kind of makes sense. And then you say something philosophical. I'm like, okay, she's a professor. That's in line. That makes sense. But then if we're hanging out and then I stab someone, you'd be like, whoa, where did that come from? Oh my God. But if you look into it, be like, okay, well, his dad stabbed 6 guys in front of him. He's done this several times in the past. That guy said something racist, which he has a history of. And this kind of realization that you can take anyone's life, and if you could look deeper at it, take a different perspective, put them under a microscope, all their actions would make sense. This is kind of like Sam Harris talks about, like free will is not really a thing because your life is set up in such a way. You're bound to the conditions of your early childhood is very influential on your future life. And then, so here's where my memory of the event maybe gets a little skewed. You talked about something about Buddhism in class that made me go, that's what I realized on the beach. So I haven't heard about this since then. Is there anything ringing any bells, like interdependence of some sort? Like, is that...
I wish I could remember what it...
Something about causality in Buddhism. But anyway, that's what got me on this path of Buddhism, was I had that realization on the beach, and I was thinking about, like, because I was with my friends, and, like, I didn't quite know them that well. It's, second year of college. We've hung out, we've been drunk together, maybe we've had a class together, but I don't know them all that well. But if I could see the gravity of their life, if I could see what rocks are in their way, in the same way, if someone has, like, a really, like, bent arm, like, the middle of their arm is bent, you can say, like, okay, that was broken, and then it didn't heal right. But I think personalities are like that as well. Like, if someone has a really traumatic event, and then they don't deal with it in the best way, the bone isn't quite set right, that's when, like, anger issues or depression or something, there's some sort of sign.
We could have been talking about karma. And even just sort of karma within a single lifetime, the things that we do sort of set us up for doing them again and becoming habitual for us in the future and shaping our own personalities. But I think more importantly, because this is such an important thing that you realize, you can do a practice, and this is a practice that's been developed, I think, in many different places in the world. I think the Hopi Indians have a practice like this. There's also one that comes from India. And that's this practice of, when you're with somebody and that person does something that's you don't understand. It's unexpected, it seems unintelligible, and so on. You think of 6 different ways or 6 different reasons why that person might have done that. Okay, so it's a lot like the example, the examples that you gave. Maybe this person, had certain childhood experiences. Maybe his parents acted in a certain way, and this is why this person did this. But this is such a great practice, and I sometimes recommend it not just to my Zen students, but also to my university students, because, we tend to buy into our stories, right? We're constantly creating these stories about our lives, about other people, about our relationships, about the past, about the future, and we very rarely take the time to just kind of be present, with what's going on. And so when we get, tied into our own story, when we really start believing our story, and as I like to say, holding it with like a clenched fist, that creates so much suffering for us, and it, often creates a lot of suffering for other people too. And so if we're lucky enough to notice when we're doing that, then we can stop and say, okay, I'm going to come up with 6 other stories to describe this situation or this person or this event or whatever it is that's at the root of this. And it's amazing how much space you can create around your tendency to sort of grab onto, to refuse to consider other alternatives than your interpretation of events. So whatever it was that triggered your, whether it was the chemicals and in a combination of a conversation we had in class or whatever caused it, it's a good thing that you had that realization.
Yeah, it's benefited me a lot, especially traveling around. It's so easy for people to, I was talking about this last night on a podcast I recorded with my friend. He's about to go traveling. Mm-hmm. It's very easy to just put things on other cultures. I was talking about, I was trying to explain to him prostitution in Thailand, about how it's just there. It's just built into the structure. I met a lot of, American girls who go over there and say, I will not support the prostitution, but, a plane ticket to Thailand support. You know what I mean? It's so built into it. And then you can't really, put what we've been taught about it. We've been taught it's a terrible thing. It's never good. There's no good time. But, maybe there is. Maybe a 45-year-old divorced guy should get a hooker sometimes. I don't know. I kind of think maybe there's a time and a place.
Yeah, you want to think of it from the point of view of everyone, though, the woman and how she's doing it. But
and
I think,
hard,
but
yeah.
you're, and this is a super difficult issue.
Of course.
But
I
think your larger point is something I can certainly embrace, and that's that cultural differences are important. Mm-hmm. They're really important to recognize and appreciate, and we don't want to go to a place that has a significantly different culture and just start overriding that culture just by projecting our own commitments and our own culture's values and practices on it, and then start judging from there. Yeah, I think I totally agree with that point.
It's a tough thing, especially if you just tell someone something about a country. They haven't even been there. They don't know anything about it. Mm-hmm. One out of context thing. It's oof, that's a tough one.
Well, I think it's gotten us into huge trouble, as a country. We go over to places with no history of democracy, and the conditions are very, very different from conditions where a democracy might be an appropriate move, and we try to just force democratic institutions on them.
Yeah.
Well, we've gotten into huge trouble that way.
One of the most enlightening things that I've seen on that same topic is a Vice interview where they went to probably Baghdad, and they're talking to guys who do illegal street racing. That's all they do all day. They just drag race. Maybe they're on motorcycles sometimes, maybe on cars. But that's just it's what they're into. That's their hobby. That's their group. Uh-huh. And so they're asking them, do you guys want democracy? And they're like, oh, of course. That'd be great. Like, okay, so now that you kind of have democracy, is life better now, or was it better under Saddam? Like, oh, it was way better under Saddam. We could drag race all day. Now cops are coming to us, and ugh, it sucks. But you guys want democracy? Oh, yeah, of course. And it's these things, I guess it's like an issue of, like, maybe we just need a new word or something. Like, maybe that's the issue. Like, if you want to vote for your leader, but you can still drag race, whatever that's called. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't know enough about politics to get into that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a good point. I don't know if I had anything more to talk about. Oh, I guess an interesting thing that I kind of want to bring up with that Tea Sage Hut place is that it attracts kind of, I don't know another way to say it other than like someone who's new to spirituality will show up there with preconceived notions of, okay, so the head guy, maybe guru is not the right word, maybe it is, I don't really know. The head guy, the cult leader guy.
I don't know if you want to
the alpha male.
Call it a cult leader.
The teacher.
Yeah, somebody who's a mentor in the situation.
And he's just a guy, he tells jokes, he farts, he talks about girls he's been with. He's he's a really funny guy. He in Indian terminology or Native American terminology, he calls himself coyote. He's kind of a trickster type guy. And so all these people show up with like big books. Like I saw a girl with a 1,000-page book called Peace. That's just like, that's what she was really into, which fair enough, that's a good cause. And then she shows up and then he's there like farting and making awesome tea and then talking about dicks and then he's talking about stand-up comedy he's seen and he's playing rock music. And then it's just a really funny thing that I would always show up there after a fight, just because of the geography of Taiwan. I was in Taipei, which directly translated just means northest. It's in the northern part of the island. Mm-hmm. And I was fighting a lot in the southern part. So I go all the way down to the south of Taiwan, and then the Tea Sage Hut is in between. Mm-hmm. So after I fight, it's just convenient to stop by. That's just how it worked out several times. So my favorite thing was to walk in there and tell stories about fighting. Or, one time was a fight on the beach during a party. So I had 3 fights. I won, I got a gold medal, and then there's a big party. I took ecstasy, I drank beer, all things that they do not do at the Tea Sage Hut. Things they do not expect. So I ran in there, not very mindfully, I hadn't been meditating, obviously. Came in there, just completely different energy than they expected. I was running, I was still happy, I had stories to tell, and this girl with her 1,000-page book on peace was just like, so offended. But one thing I've noticed with you is and somebody who brought this up at this retreat, sometimes people intentionally try to offend you. Like, there's no way I could tell her that I took acid. There's no way. She would disown me. She won't teach me how to meditate anymore. Oh my God, if I told her, like, I can't pretend to be like a sexual human around her. I can't even like, I've never been with a girl. I've never talked to a girl. Like, whatever it is, like, but I kind of think it's kind of like the mark of someone who's actually put in the practice. You've been meditating 38 years. You've gone deep into yourself. You've sat through all these, like, I forget what you call them, but interviews with the teacher. You've had them on the side of a student when you've told the teacher, I'm sure, secrets, things you haven't told maybe anybody else. That's possible.
It's true.
People have told you things that maybe they've told nobody else. I'm sure terrible things, I'm sure great things, the whole spectrum. So my point is that, like, it's kind of the hallmark of someone who's gone through it that you can't really offend them. Like, I shouldn't say can't, but it's really hard. You're not going to offend them with stuff I've done. I went to a fight and, I got this guy in an armbar. Oh my God, that could hurt him. Well, yeah, but he tapped. And then the teacher overheard me say that. He's like, yeah, he should have snapped it. You got an armbar? Should have broken it. Ooh. That's kind of, he's joking. Let's actually recommend that.
That's harsh. That's really harsh.
But I think he was doing the kind of the same thing I was, just like playing with this girl's sensibility about what we should be. Yeah. Oh, you're a meditator? You should never be angry. What? Like, when do you make these rules?
Yeah, I really can see the beauty of at least from your story of what he does, because this is something that happens in Zen all the time. People come in and they have all these ideas, not only about themselves, but about what a good Zen practitioner is like, or what a good Zen teacher should be like. And one of the kindest things, one of the most, as is said in the long Chan Zen tradition, one of the most grandmotherly things one can do is to upset those ideas, to upset those preconceptions. Not because, we just want to destroy somebody's preconceptions, but because people can be freer when they're not tied, they're not tying themselves up with these kinds of conceptual and attitudinal ropes. But at the same time, we do have to be careful here.
Yeah.
Zen is really great for, as we were saying before, creating a lot of space around ideas. I and anybody who's practiced Zen for a while has experienced a lot of their own muck. They've been through, they've seen into the most unflattering, or a lot of the most unflattering places of their own personalities, their tendencies, their habits, their attitudes, etc., right? And we learn to sort of open and include all of that. We include everything, okay? We really learn how to include everything that happens in life. But remember, there's also a relative side of Zen where we do make distinctions and we do rank things, and we do want from that side to encourage, behavior that doesn't hurt people and so on. So I don't want to give anybody the impression that, if you practice Zen, everything's okay. You can do anything you want. You can go out and, hurt people and kill people. No, that's not the case. And historically, people always practice Zen, in institutions that were guided by certain moral precepts.
Right.
And so even though the precepts are often not even mentioned in Zen, it's because they're so taken for granted. They're there, shaping people's behaviors from the time they were very little kids. Zen is, opens us not just to this wisdom of non-duality and emptiness, but also to our own compassionate nature. And ultimately, the bodhisattva, the compassionate being who works to help liberate sentient beings, that's really the ideal of Zen. And so even though we have all these freewheeling guys who are twisting people's noses and slapping and shouting and, upsetting everybody's expectations, ultimately Zen teaches us how to be compassionate and how to be of service to others.
I like it. I like it.
I like it too.
That's cool. That's cool. You talk about upsetting expectations and stuff. I just read a whole book called The Naked Jape, written by a big comedian in England, Jimmy Carr. And he's saying that, he says it several times in the book, that is the role of the comedian. You take something that's slightly taboo, something that people think about but they don't quite talk about. That's the joke you have to make. And it doesn't always go well. The biggest example that I read in the book was on September 19th, 2001, Gilbert Gottfried played a charity event in New York City. Very troubling time for New York City.
Sure, this is right after 9/11.
Right after 9/11. He's doing a set, Gilbert Gottfried, I don't know how long he's been doing comedy at the time. A long time. He's a seasoned veteran. And so the show's going well, and then he makes a joke. He says, I live in New York City. I'm trying to go to California, but they say I have to stop off the Empire State Building first. The crowd goes silent.
Oh my gosh.
He went too far.
Yeah, too far.
But then he pulled the show back on track by doing the Aristocrats joke. Are you familiar with the Aristocrats joke?
No.
Okay, so the Aristocrats, it was turned into a movie, a very, very crude movie. It's thought of as the most disgusting joke he could tell. And so it's just set up in very boring manner. A man walks into an office and says, I have a family act. He says, okay, what does the act entail? And from there, it's the job of the comedian to improvise the worst act that these guys can do. You know, it often involves pooping on each other. It's a family. Maybe they're eating some of it. Any sort of like sexual activity. And so the movie, every person starts with the same premise. They walk into the casting agency, and then here's the act. And the thing is just to improvise the worst thing possible. And then at the end, the punchline is, and what do you call it? We call it the aristocrats. The point being that that's not a very good punchline. Like, it's not very good. The whole joke is in the telling. But, you know, from a certain perspective, a family pooping on each other, incest, rape, all these things might be worse than one plane going into a building. But at the time, that was much funner to the audience. And it's just interesting, like, how it's a subtle art in upturning people's expectations. So I said I walked in there, talked about fighting. That's much different than sitting in meditation and kicking someone. That would be taking it too far, of course. I should not, like, bodily excrement should not be in the zendo. You should not, that would be too far. Don't vomit somewhere, people don't meditate. That's too far. But talking about it in a certain situation, especially on stage or like in a comedy setting, in a book, that's when it's appropriate for, it's one way that's appropriate.
Yeah, right time, place, person. You
can upset people's expectations by going to Rodrigo Medeiros' gym and doing 10 planet moves. That's one way to do it. You can go to my dad, tell him that I'm not going to get a corporate job. That's going to upset his expectations. There's many, many ways to do this, and it's a big pleasure that I have in life, is upsetting people's expectations. It's always funny. You go up to, I'm trying to think of an example of, like, I don't really have a good example of how I've done this, like, when talking to new girls, but that's a very ripe environment for it. You just go up. Oh, okay, so in the movie, Everybody Wants Some. I try to give out movie recommendations on the podcast. Here's a big one. Everybody Wants Some. It's the sequel to Dazed and Confused. Not so much in it's like the same characters, but it's the same director and same kind of movie, where it's just a guy goes to college. That's the whole story. A guy in college. And one of the guys there, he talks to girls. His thing is he talks about his average-sized penis. This upsets their expectations because every guy in there's like 9 inches of power, like just like going like way too much, way too far. And so his big move is, no, it's average. It's nothing special, but it gets the job done. I know what I'm doing. So I wish I had an example from my own life that's funny. That's as funny as that one, but I don't think I do.
Is this a current movie? I mean,
it came out several months ago.
Oh, okay.
It'll probably be on the internet soon. I don't know about Netflix. I don't know how Netflix works. It'll be around. It's a very, very good movie, though. I recommend it to everybody. I watched it with my buddy, and his roommate walked in. And it's one of those movies that's very episodic, like Dazed and Confused, where there's kind of a story, but not really. It's not so important. And so my friend came in, he saw 30 minutes of it, and then he left. And my other friend's like, he didn't need to know anything, and now that he left, he's not missing anything. Very, very well done movie. We've been talking for about an hour. I think I talked about everything I want to talk about. Do you have any last messages for our audience?
No, not really. Just, be yourselves.
Be yourselves.
Be yourselves and enjoy Marshall's podcast. I want to thank you for inviting me to do this.
Oh, always my pleasure. You have an open invitation. I think we'll do this many more times. I certainly hope so.
Sounds
I know you're
good.
busy, but I'll probably be in town a lot. My friend lives right around the corner.
Great.
It's great. It's awesome. Appreciate you so much. Anyone listening, if you've never meditated before, I highly recommend it. Give it a shot. If you don't know how, sit down and breathe. I don't know. What's like the simplest way to meditate? Count your breath?
I think that's a really good way to start, is to, assume a posture where you've got at least a relatively straight spine. You can use a meditation cushion, or you can sit in a chair. But just take your attention to your breath as it moves in and out, and you can take that attention down to your your lower abdomen, say a couple inches below your belly button. And you can count the breaths. And so count on the out breath. And what you do is you count 10 breaths and then return to 1. But in the meanwhile, if you've counted 1, okay, 1 breath on the out breath, and then you suddenly find yourself making a list of things you need to do, that's okay. Just go back to 1. Start over again. And every time you notice that your attention has wandered away from your breath and counting your breath, just go back to 1. Start over again.
Yeah, and anyone thinking that their mind will wander and that's a reason to not meditate, no, that's what everyone's brain does. You're not special.
Exactly.
You're not unique. Everyone wants to get off the mat.
Yeah.
Everyone has things to do.
Also, if you're interested in formal Zen meditation, and if you're in San Diego, I'll encourage you to visit the Vista Zen Center. It's in Vista, and we meet on Tuesday nights, but there's also sitting on Sundays and on the weekdays in the morning.
Is there a website, or I can find it?
I'm sure. Look it up. It's I think it's just thevistazencenter.org, but you better look it up because I haven't had to type in the address for a while, so I'm not sure what it is exactly.
Google it. Thanks for listening, guys. Goodbye.